I am the co-founder of Cultivated Media, the host of this program, Cultivated Live. And since we launched, our goal at Cultivated has been to be cannabis industry first, providing you, our viewers and readers, the most important, insightful, useful, and timely information. We do that through our daily newsletter at Cultivated Daily. We do that through this daily live stream called Cultivated Live. We would love for you to follow us on LinkedIn, subscribe to us on YouTube, and get our daily newsletter in your inbox every single morning. There's ways to do that in the show notes. I am here today, like all Tuesdays, with Brad Spearson, the founder and CEO of Grown In. Brad, hello.
Good morning.
Good morning. It feels like an extra long weekend type of Tuesday, so welcome. And we're joined today by Joanne Caceres from Dentons. Joanne, welcome.
Thank you.
On Tuesdays, Brad, you know this, we talk the intersection of like policy, politics, and cannabis. We like to call it United States of Cannabis. And Joanne, there's lots happening in the United States of Cannabis with the government of the United States of America. Give us a little bit of background. When the DEA, you're going to tell me what is exactly happening now. You used a fancy, not acronym, but initials. Tell us what the initials are and what it actually means as it pertains to rescheduling.
So last month, basically pretty late in April, we had this big announcement from Biden. He said, this is monumental. We're going to propose a rulemaking to move cannabis to Schedule 3. So that notice that was then published on Tuesday, the following Tuesday, I think it was the 21st, is called the NPRM, right? So that is Notice of Proposed Rulemaking. And what it is basically doing is kicking off a process within the DEA to take the FDA's recommendation, which has been out there since August of last year, to reschedule cannabis from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3.
Yes. And you quoted the president, but can I run the president saying monumental? Because then you're gonna talk me down from how monumental it is, I think. Hold on.
This is monumental. Today, my administration took a major step to reclassify marijuana from a Schedule 1 drug to a Schedule 3 drug. It's an important move toward reversing long-standing inequities. Today's announcement builds on the work we've already done to pardon a record number of federal offenses for simple possession of marijuana. And it adds to the action we've taken to lift barriers to housing, employment, small business loans, and so much more for tens of thousands of Americans. Look, folks, no one should be in jail merely for using or possessing marijuana, period. Far too many lives have been upended because of failed approach to marijuana, and I'm committed to righting those wrongs. You have my word on it.
Okay, Joanne, he's committed to righting those wrongs. I agree with everything he said, but that's not exactly what the DEA said. We talked about it a little bit before. What's on page 13?
Yes. So, the president is right that this is a major step. I think the big thing I want to make sure people know is it's not the final step. It's actually kind of a beginning step. So if you look at the NPRM itself, and that's how I refer to it, it's published online. It's available for everyone. Everyone should read it, or at least parts of it. You get to page 13, and what you see is the DEA has not determined the appropriate schedule. So that is, I would say, unusual. Usually an NPRM is basically saying the DEA has decided, or it proposes, right? It's not a final decision in an NPRM. That is typical. It proposes moving to Schedule 3, let's say, for example, in this. That basically means that that's what they're going to do absent information otherwise. This NPRM is different. It's saying we actually haven't made our final determination, which basically means that there's at least some faction of the DEA that is not convinced by the FDA's recommendation. And the FDA's recommendation, just by the way, has been publicly available since January. So that's something you can also find online. If you want to read it, it's a whopping like 282 pages. So I read it. You don't necessarily need to unless you're a scientist. But so, it's somewhat reading between the lines, but it's a kind of an open secret. There's not total agreement within the DEA that Schedule 3 is appropriate. And what you'll see if you read the NPRM, at least in 5 or 6 places, the DEA says, we would like to see additional data on X, right? And so I'm just going to read one part. DEA believes the factual evidence, including scientific data and expert opinion, would be useful, right? So they're saying the data from the FDA, they have to look at it. They have to take it into consideration. They even have to give it some amount of deference, but they are the final arbiter, the DEA. And they're saying, we want to see more data, which, I read to say, we're not totally convinced by the data FDA has given us. So we need more. And that's where everybody here comes in.
Brad, before you ask a question, can I run the latest we've heard from Ann Milgram at a congressional hearing? This was before the recommendation, or before the president said it was monumental.
Go
This
for
is
it.
what she said. Can I run that?
Please.
Congressman, under the Controlled Substances Act, there's a formal rulemaking process for scheduling or rescheduling controlled substances. That process is ongoing. The next step in that process will be a notice of proposed rulemaking and then an opportunity for public comment. Because DEA is involved very much in that scheduling process and the DEA administrator is personally involved in it, it would be inappropriate for me to comment on it at this time.
So she's saying she's personally involved in it. At the same time, what happened the next week or something was that they actually didn't say we're rescheduling or we're recommending anything, right?
Right. So it was the Attorney General who actually proposed the move from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. As I mentioned, page 13, you can find that the DEA says we have not made our final determination. And it does sit with the DEA to look at both the scientific data that the FDA sends, but they can also look at all other data, right? So they have a very broad discretion to look at things. And so they're going to be interested in medical stuff, but they're also going to be interested in how it affects crime, how it affects driving, how it affects, et cetera, et cetera. Any other thing that could be relevant is something the DEA can and is supposed to, under the law, consider for whether or not it reschedules.
What can industry stakeholders or medical patients or those, obviously want to see rescheduling pushed forward do to communicate their concerns?
I could not be more happy with that question. There are several things. So as I mentioned, it was published on May 21. That begins a 60-day notice and comment period. All members of the public can and should comment if you have something to say. If you're a medical patient, what I would love for you to do is tell your personal story of how it's helped, but even more importantly, talk to your doctor about telling their stories about what they've seen and how it's helped, right? That's going to be some amount of evidence. Obviously, if you're aware of scientific studies, it's great to put them in there. We basically want to build the record, right? So if there's scientific studies you're aware of that haven't been published by the FDA, send them in. If you're an industry stakeholder, especially a state regulator or an operator, what I'd love to see, and I think we need to show is, how has the state improved with the illicit market? How has communities benefit? How has teen use gone down or stayed flat is what we mostly believe to be true. How has drunk driving gone down or stayed flat? Things we believe to be true from other studies. Those types of real world evidence, right? Because I think the big hang up, if I'm thinking like the DEA, is they've seen the harms of the illicit market, the violent portion of the illicit market, and they're attributing that to the plant instead of to the illicitness of the market, right? So we want to show them the illicit market is good. Here are all the benefits of the illicit market. Here are especially the medical benefits. So that's why the doctors and the patients are the most important. But any benefits, any way that it has helped, showing that, the sky hasn't fallen in states where it's become legal, which of course we all know is true. That's the kind of data that we can put in the record. And let me just back up because I didn't mention, there's also a 30-day deadline from that May 21st date to request a hearing. So we're anticipating most likely that folks are going to be requesting a hearing, folks on both sides, right? So the opposition is going to probably request a hearing. Someone pro better also request to be part of that hearing, right? So what's going to happen is there'll be the 60-day comment period. And day one, I think there are already 1,000 comments, right? And we did see a mix of positive and negative. So there'll be the 60-day comment. There's a 30-day to ask for a hearing. I think it's highly likely that a hearing will be granted. It doesn't need to be, it's discretionary. So then there will be the hearing, and the hearing will look at all that evidence that was put in, both by the FDA and by the notice of proposed rulemaking. And then the administrative law judge of that hearing will make a recommendation to the DEA for the schedule.
So this will be an administrative law judge hearing, like a court case, where the DEA will be there, the AG, like who's sitting at the tables?
Yeah, so an administrative hearing will be, there's an administrative law judge who works for the DEA, is the judge, and they get to basically hear whoever's called for the hearing. Those will be the parties. They'll submit evidence. Usually you'll have an expert, right? So there'll be some expert talking about what are the usual con arguments? The con arguments are about, is it increasing psychosis? Is the potency getting more dangerous? Is it leading to more crime or more drunk driving or whatever, all the evidence they're going to have. And then we're going to need our own other experts, right? Especially for medical use, especially for benefits. And then the ALJ will take all of that, and similar to a federal lawsuit in any other context, they will weigh the evidence and they will come up with a recommendation. That recommendation is not binding on anyone, but they make a recommendation to the administrator. And one more fun fact is that a DEA ALJ has recommended rescheduling cannabis in the past.
Okay.
I don't remember what schedule it was to, but in the past there was a hearing and ALJ did recommend rescheduling. And the administrator just said, no, we don't agree with that. So it can happen again.
And so what is the time? I mean, so within the 30 days, for sure, someone's going to request a hearing. That hearing will happen on what timeline, and a ruling on that hearing will happen on what timeline? Like, is there any, or could be infinity?
Yeah, there are no set timelines. We know this is something that the president cares about, something the president wants to see done. So we assume that there is a plan for that to happen on a fast scale, right? Everyone kind of thinks you want this to be wrapped by October if you're trying to get some sort of election benefit, let's say, for the Biden administration. But there is no set timeline for when a hearing will be set. It has to be scheduled. All the parties have to be able to make it. It's all the wonderful, AKA horrible things about litigation that it can drag on, right? So as I mentioned, there's some optimism that it would stay in that timeline, but it can go longer. There's no set timeline.
Okay. I wish we had you on right after the president spoke, because I think but this brings up the question. I think the politics of it and how strong that is, from the president to even the AG versus the DEA. Like, I don't want to set up this false battle, but it seems like the administrator is purposely not talking about it at the congressional hearing. Maybe that was premature, but also not saying we will recommend X in the 13 pages. So where does politics come in, and where does the DEA come in? And if you had to weight those two, what weighs more?
I think that's a tough question that will remain to be seen, right? But I think
$20 million.
It's $1 million question. But I do think the president was right when he said this is monumental. It was the start of something big, and the process. This is how the process should work, right? There was some speculation maybe the DA would do a final action or something a little bit less decisive, but what they chose to do is to have the process bear out the way it's meant to. And I think that is consistent with what Biden has said, right? He wants the administrative review to happen. And I do agree with the president that at this point, he's done everything he could do to reschedule, and he's believing in the process and allowing the process to work.
Now, rescheduling is where it's implied to reschedule to Schedule 3, which was the recommendation of the FDA. Can you tease out what a potential rescheduling to Schedule 2 would mean in terms of benefits we don't already have, as well as restrictions that are not available in Schedule 3?
Mm-hmm. So the biggest thing for Schedule 2, the biggest win of Schedule 2, right, is that Schedule 1 is no medical value. Schedule 2 is recognized medical value. So it would still be a historical change in the fact that the US government would finally admit to the fact that cannabis has medical value. Arguably they've admitted it to before, like when they got a patent on it, but officially admit. So it's good in that way, but it's negative in other ways for us. It's still very restricted research. It's still almost as restrictive as Schedule 1 for most things. And for the industry, the most important thing, of course, is that 280E would still apply, because that applies to Schedule 1 and Schedule 2 drugs. So, it would be largely a symbolic victory. It wouldn't change much about the industry, how it works, or the legal status of cannabis in the country.
I have a list of Schedule 2 drugs. You want to hear them?
Yes.
Well, Schedule 1 is LSD, heroin, ecstasy, and peyote. Actually, I didn't know that one. But Schedule 2 is Vicodin, cocaine, methamphetamine, methadone, and some words I can't even say, Oxycontin, fentanyl, Dexatrin, Adderall, and Ritalin. Those are Schedule 2 drugs. Some of them seem pretty bad. And then it says the Schedule 2 drugs, substances or chemicals are defined as drugs with a high potential for abuse, with use potentially leading to psychological or physical dependence. So,
Right.
Schedule 3 is way better.
Schedule 3 is way more accurate. I mean, if you look at Marinol or Dronabinol, I always forget how to pronounce that one. But if you look at the approved cannabinoid medicines, they are Schedule 3 or lower. I think there is one cannabis-like drug on Schedule 2, but that is where the science seems to point. That is what the FDA is saying, where the science points that it should go. As I mentioned, the FDA is going to get deference. They just need whatever other supporting evidence folks have.
So all you medical cannabis patients, get your doctors to write a letter during this public comment period. That is,
yeah, you do it right online. You just type it up and click send,
yeah, or cut and paste, as the case may be, with advocacy groups. Joanne, can we switch gears a bit? Because depending on what we're talking about over the past couple of years, there's been like this, let's call it like a horse race. Safe banking seems like it's going to happen, and there's movement in Congress, and then it's a priority, but it hasn't moved. So then the rescheduling is now, I guess, in the lead potentially. Is there a chance that, in the horse race analogy, that safer banking catches up and passes over the next 30, 60, 90 days ahead of the election?
I think there certainly is potential. And there definitely was movement even, when the FDA first made their recommendation to move to 3. We think that does make a big difference in Congress, especially in the Senate. This idea of, there is a federal agency recognizing that there is a medical value. And there's just a big mental difference between Schedule 1 and any other schedule, right? As we mentioned, no accepted use, completely prohibited, to accepted use. So yes, that's been probably part of the reason that SAFER has advanced as much as it does. And it seems by all reports that there is a will. It's just not clear exactly the way, right? So for a while, they were thinking they were going to attach it to the FAA, which is a federal aviation bill. There's certain senators that are against adding anything that doesn't have to do with aviation to an aviation bill, which kind of makes sense.
Either way,
right?
you're getting fine.
The way like politics, horse trading works is, not my area of expertise, but it became clear kind of closer to that time that it wasn't going to be attached to that, but that there are still some other bills. There's one about, stability for cryptocurrency that it could get attached to, or it could come as a standalone. So it's really like, can it get to the floor, which is how this politics game works. If it can get to the floor, it has enough votes to pass, is what we understand to be true. So yes, we could see it in the next 60 days. We could see maybe a wait and see though, right? I'm not going to try to guess that I understand the motivations of some of these politicians.
It is, I would say, slow season in Congress, meaning soon people want to get home for elections, right? Everybody in Congress, the House is up for a re-election in November. And soon I think they take off, certainly from July 4th, almost through Labor Day. So it's not like there's hundreds of days of Congress left before the election, before these things get taken up. But wouldn't that be, let's pie in the sky, blue sky it positively right now. Could we get to, it's feasible, it seems, with everything you said, even all the caveats, that we could get to an election day in November where cannabis has been rescheduled to Schedule 3 and safer banking has passed Congress. That would be, as Joe Biden likes to say, monumental. Right? But it could equally be that the clock runs out between now and November on both things.
Right. Yes. If I were a betting woman, I would say rescheduling has the better chance. I still think, right, the evidence that the FDA has put forward, it's really comprehensive. As I mentioned, it's a almost 300-page document that has data, and it makes a lot of sense. Obviously, we think. I think I'll put slight odds on that, but I do think SAFER is also close. So we'll see. We've been disappointed by SAFER in the past before, right? But we're right around on schedule for reform, right? Reform usually takes about 10 years. We're right about at 10 years for SAFER that it's been proposed and not passed. So,
Brad, where are you putting your money?
I think rescheduling. I think it's important that all of us in the industry adhere to Joanne's advice and communicate to our elected officials and the folks at the FDA and the DEA the benefits of cannabis. And I think that with that happening, I do see a clear path for rescheduling. I see a shot for safer because to Joanne's point again, once it's recognized as having medicinal value, I think the case automatically becomes fortified. What I'd like to find out is the proverbial cherry on the cake of election day, and whether or not we think the Floridians are going to bring that market into recreational with a 60% vote. Joanne, are you following that race?
Yes, I am following that race. I think it's going to be close. It'll be a close call. I think all the earliest polling was not that positive, although the undecided group was decidedly big enough that if enough of them are swayed, we could get to that 60%. And Florida Medical did also pass with a 60% requirement back in the day. So it's going to be a marathon there, but I think there is a chance. There is a chance that it will pass. In Florida.
I also think having the sort of the other measure that needs 60% is abortion rights, which also drives lots and lots of votes. And I think of those votes that it drives, if those people aren't aware there's a cannabis measure on, they'll vote yes on that. That's my political take. But also, it puts interesting things in play in Florida with the presidential race. So lots happening certainly between rescheduling, safe banking, Florida's election. And two other things, if I could just wrap up with these two things that were in today's newsletter. One, Chris Alexander from the New York State Office of Cannabis Management, he is the executive director, I don't know the exact title, is stepping down. Initially, after a review that the governor ordered, it was going to be recommended that Chris Alexander not be re-upped in September. Instead, it's going to be 2 weeks from now, so things are moving faster than the recommendations that the governor ordered. And New Hampshire, Brad, what has happened since we last talked is exactly what we said was going to happen, is that the Senate passed I didn't call it this, but the New Hampshire Cannabis Association lead called it a Soviet-style cannabis regime, that the Senate has passed there. The House has passed a far more free market approach. The two need to be, worked out and then repassed in the House again. It's unclear if that's going to happen, so we wait and see. The governor there has said he would pass the Senate version, which the industry doesn't necessarily want. So New Hampshire is proving itself once again to be its own unique New England animal. So we will keep our eyes on both New York and New Hampshire. It is anybody's guess, I guess. New Hampshire politics are of their own. Joanne, did you know this? We talked about it last week that the New Hampshire Senate has, I think, like 24 members. The New Hampshire House of Representatives has like 400 something. So like a massive house, a tiny Senate in a teeny tiny state. It's like every 10 people has their own House member in New Hampshire, and they can't seem to get along between the bicameral legislature, which is...
Yeah, New Hampshire always seemed like a long shot for this year, although it would be great, as always.
Yeah, I don't know what's going to happen. My sense is it actually may not. The differences between this House and the Senate version may be intractable. But if someone from New Hampshire wants to talk about it, we're here to have them on. We've had them on twice before from the association, so we look forward to that as well. Joanne, as always, thank you for joining us on this segment of United States of Cannabis. Brad, thank you for the deep dive in all things DEA and safe banking, and even a little bit of Florida. That is our show for today. That's been Cultivated Live. Again, my name is Jay Rosenthal. You can find everything we do at cultivated.news. If I say it nice and slow, it's easier to point to my hat. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Get our daily newsletter in your inbox. Find us on LinkedIn. Tomorrow is Wednesday. We're going to have my co-founder and our editor-in-chief, Jeremy Burke, with us. That'll be 10 a.m. Eastern right here, wherever you're seeing us, whether it's on X or YouTube or LinkedIn. Everybody, if you are able to, buy cannabis at your local dispensary today. They had a big weekend last weekend, so this week's a little slow. There's probably some deals to be had, so go buy cannabis at your local dispensary. Joanne, thank you so much. Brad, thank you so much.